What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. I'm joined by your favorite beat reporter, Chris Fedor. What up, Chris?
Ethan, how's it going, man?
I'm doing well. How does it feel to be back in your own home?
Feels great. For what, 24 hours? That's the way that it's been in March. You come home for a game, 2 days basically, and then you leave on the road again. But it feels great. Elliot came down the stairs with Mama, and he saw my suitcase, and he just turned to Mama and said, Dada? Dada? So he knows when my suitcase is right there by the door, it either means that I'm leaving or coming back. So he saw that and he ran right to me, and it's been a great night with him.
Fantastic. And the next game that you get to work is on Sunday in Denver because I'm going to handle stuff on Friday so you can get some extra family time. But before then, I think we need to talk about things that are going on in the Cavs world right now. And most recently, Marcus Morris Sr. is expected to get an extended deal for the remainder of the season. Chris, I know you have a lot more on that than I do. What's going on with Marcus?
Yeah, I mean, the Cavs had two options, obviously, Ethan. They could have given him another 10-day contract and kind of extended the audition just to see if some of what they got from him in this first run was more fool's gold or if it was actually real. But the front office felt like they saw enough from Marcus, felt like he could still make an impact on the floor, felt like he was making a positive impact behind the scenes. Good teammate, fit in the locker room, has a relationship with Coach JB Bickerstaff, has trust with JB, can play the 3 or the 4. And I think given the situation that the Cavs are currently in, even going into the playoffs, there are questions about Dean Wade and his effectiveness, especially in a 7-game series. How much is JB Bickerstaff going to trust him? How's his knee going to respond toward the end of the season? What's his confidence level going to be up if he's not at 100%? And then George Niang is somebody that we've talked about throughout the course of this season. He's provided a spark off the bench. He's provided leadership. He's a good veteran. He has a bunch of playoff experience. He's knocking down threes, especially here in the month of March, and providing an offensive jolt. And he's a big reason why the Cavs have gone from the third worst bench in the NBA to a top half of the league bench. But at the same time, defense is a problem for him at times in certain matchups. There are situations where the Cavs are trying to switch things on defense, or there are situations where the opponent sees a mismatch against George, and you have to start to wonder, in a 7-game series, when it's all about exploiting weaknesses, are teams going to try and attack George and take him out of the series that way and make him so that he's unplayable? So having as many different options going into a 7-game series is going to be important for the Cavs, because maybe one night it is George Niang's night. Maybe another night they need the things that Marcus Morris Sr. brings instead of George. Or another night they need the things that Dean Wade is going to bring instead of George. So I just think combining the things that the Cavs have already seen from Marcus Morris Sr. in this short stint and the things that they know and believe about him and how he could potentially fit in a 7-game series, I think it became a no-brainer, because the other thing is, it's not like there's somebody else just chilling on the market that would make sense from a basketball standpoint and from a behind-the-scenes fit standpoint, where they're like, okay, we can go find this person, bring him here at the end of March, and he can be an asset for us. And there wasn't somebody just chilling in the G League the way that Sam Merrill was last year. If you remember, at the end of last year, Ethan, they brought up Sam Merrill. They gave him a standard NBA contract. Yeah, in the short term, they needed some more shooting and some floor spacing. But that was more about the big picture. That was more about the long term. That was more about a multi-year play. There isn't somebody like that that's just chilling in the G League that the Cavs could go identify and say, all right, we're going to give that guy a standard NBA contract because of what he could mean 2-3 years down the road. So all of those things combined just made it pretty simple for this team to go with Marcus Morris Sr. on a standard contract, have him be a part of this down the stretch and going into the postseason.
Yeah, and I mean, the two biggest things for me on Marcus are kind of intertwined. It goes mentality and it goes physicality, because he brings both. The guy literally said after he got ejected from the game earlier this week about he would be willing to lay somebody out on any given night if the Cavs were able to respond in the same way that they did. And that was against the Charlotte Hornets, and obviously he didn't play in the second game against the Charlotte Hornets, and maybe the Cavs needed that kind of jolt. But the other thing was that he mentioned wanting to implement a no dunk rule, which I think is really, really old school. And we've talked about the JB Bickerstaff connection and how JB has harped on his love for the old school mentality of basketball this entire season. So I think that's a really good little nugget that goes into that, and how not only will he help on the bench and keeping people in check and making sure that they understand that the Cavs are trying to show that they cannot be messed with or should not be messed with this year, but that on the court he is going to set the tone and be able to be somebody that the Cavs can look to when they need something like that. And Evan Mobley even mentioned that hard fouls and things like that are really important in today's game, especially in the paint, and trying to let your presence be known in the painted area. But Evan did say he can't keep getting ejected because they need him. And obviously Marcus said that he wasn't trying to get kicked out of the game. He had been physical with other guys during the couple games beforehand. It just didn't go the same way.
Here's the other thing too, Ethan. I mean, it's clear no matter what people from this organization have said over the last year and a half, no matter what JB Bickerstaff has said over the last year and a half, the reputation of them being soft and not physical enough that was built in that first round series against the Knicks, because they did. They got out physical, they got out toughed, they got overmatched in the front court. This organization pushed back on that repeatedly and said, hey, look, you can't have that reputation. You can't be that kind of team if you're going to be number one in defense. But just look at every single move that they have made, every addition that they have made since that series against the Knicks. And yeah, we can talk about stylistically and the skill set that Niang brings and how much they needed a floor spacing power forward, and Max Strus and the movement and the cutting and the ability to be more dynamic on the offensive end of the floor because of his constant movement, because of his three-point shooting, because of the stuff that they can run in terms of DHOs with some of the bigs. Just a different layer to the offense that didn't exist last year. That's all part of the skill set stuff, right? But Max Strus, George Niang, Tristan Thompson, and Marcus Morris Sr., those were the additions that the Cavs made following that playoff series against the Knicks. Every single one of those guys has a reputation for being tough, physical, and in the case of George Niang, a bit mouthy, willing to mix it up on the court. So it was clear that the Cavs saw an opening there. It was clear that the Cavs saw a weakness there, and the front office went out, tried to address it as much as they could, and when they still felt like something like that was missing, they had an opportunity to go out and get Marcus Morris Sr. on a 10-day contract. They brought him in, and he's doing those kinds of things that he was brought here to do. They need guys that have playoff experience. They need guys that understand how to play with an edge. They need guys that have mixed it up with other teams in a 7-game playoff series. It's pretty clear to me that the front office saw the whole lack of physicality, no matter what they said about it, as a clear problem, because every single one of the guys that they added in the aftermath of that Knicks series has that kind of reputation, and it's certainly not a coincidence.
And the calls that are now starting to be made by the referees, or lack thereof, if we want to talk about this season, and how they've been calling less fouls on the interior, talking about players that are more physical and trying to level the playing field when it comes to offense versus defense, because we've seen the NBA become an offense heavy game. And now with those calls being more lenient, and we've seen guys like Marcus Morris Sr. try and assert their will. And JB Bickerstaff even talked about how teams that are known to be physical will be allowed to get away with more because they're known to be physical. And teams that are not, if you just show up and be physical, then that's going to draw an alarm from the referees. And I think that's a big thing for the Cavs over the last couple of games of the season, because you need to make that reputation of, if you're going to decide to be a physical team and use the guys that you have, especially with Max Strus coming back and Dean Wade coming back and Donovan Mitchell coming back, and now the the addition of Marcus Morris Sr. If you want to become that physical team, that mouthy team, that team that tries to put teams on their back early and continue to assert their will, you have to do that soon, or the NBA isn't going to give you that same lenience. And that gets into my next thing, talking about Dean Wade returning to the mix and how much more difficult it's going to be for a guy like Marcus Morris Sr., who was brought in on a 10-day and is now getting an end of the season contract, to get minutes, because we saw against the Charlotte Hornets on Wednesday that he didn't get any playing time. He got a DNP, and it seemed like a lot of the fans were wondering why Marcus didn't get that playing time.
You think?
Yeah, yeah. And the biggest thing was Max Strus needed to be in the game. Max Strus needed to get his minutes and get his reps. And also, Max Strus was hitting in his first game back. So that's the other thing. It's like we now are back to the conversation of who gets minutes, who doesn't. Does the rotation get longer now that it's not a conversation of 11 man? Now it's a conversation of 12 man. And what Marcus Morris brings, and does Marcus Morris jump Craig Porter Jr. in the rotation, even though they don't play the same position? But like when we talk about minutes and how we can move Max Strus to the 2 into the 3 rather than having Sam Merrill play the 2 or Karis LeVert play the 2 and the 3, like there are more options for those kind of guys rather than Craig Porter Jr. fighting for the 1 and 2 spot with Donovan Mitchell. But this is more my question about Dean Wade and Marcus Morris Sr. How difficult do you think that's going to be?
If we're just talking about the playoff series, and we're not talking about these final 9 games in the regular season, just in the playoffs, Craig Porter Jr. is not playing. It's not happening. If the Cavs are full strength, if Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland are healthy and effective, if Karis LeVert is healthy and effective, Craig Porter Jr. is not playing in the playoffs. It's not happening. Because Donovan's going to play 44 minutes. Darius is going to play like 36 to 40. He's going to lean on Karis LeVert, who's been really, really effective, even though his offense has been sporadic in terms of his scoring anyway. That's been sporadic over the last week and a half. So you just run out of spots for somebody like Craig. So we can ignore him. Marcus Morris Sr., Dean Wade, and George Niang, they're all battling for minutes at the same spot. And I think there are 2 layers to this, Ethan. I think the number one is, how much throughout the course of a 7-game series is JB willing to play Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen together and go with the 2 bigs? Because if he feels like it would be more beneficial for the team to split those 2 guys up and go 1 in, 4 out, then Evan Mobley theoretically becomes the backup center, and it's a conversation about who's more effective between Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley in terms of who's going to get more of the center minutes. But if he feels like it's a matchup where Evan and Jarrett can function together, the Cavs are gaining so much on the defensive end of the floor that it offsets what they could potentially be losing on the offensive end, then it's a little bit of a different situation for those other guys behind. The other thing is, Marcus Morris Sr. was brought here, and when he was brought here, there was a clearly defined 10-man rotation. Now, at that same time, Dean Wade was injured, Max Strus was injured, Donovan was on the sidelines, and Evan Mobley was as well. But when full strength, or close to full strength, there still is a clear hierarchy with this organization. And it's hard for me to sit here and say, given everything that Dean Wade has meant to the team's success throughout the course of this year, and everything that George Niang has meant to the team's success throughout the course of this year, both on the court and off the court, it's hard for me to sit here and envision a scenario where Morris comes in the middle of March and JB Bickerstaff basically ignores all that other stuff that Dean already did for them and Niang already did for them, and has Morris leapfrog those guys going into a playoff series. There's just not as much trust that Morris has built up to this point when you compare him to Niang and Wade. In saying that, I do think having Morris on this roster and the option that JB is going to have will allow him to make quicker decisions when it comes to who's going to get that playing time. So I think going into the series, if Dean Wade is healthy and effective, and that remains a question because we haven't seen him in a while, and when it seemed like he was ready to come back off his personal issue, he had 1 practice, he did 4-on-4 stuff after practice, and he's been out ever since. So it's been about 2 weeks. for Dean since that moment. And it was a week before then. So it's been about 3 weeks overall. But I think the way that the Cavs play with Dean on the floor, the defense that he brings, the shooting, the spacing, the smarts on offense, the rebounding, knowing where to be, not needing touches, low maintenance, all that kind of stuff. Going into a playoff series, I think the debate starts between George Niang and Dean Wade. And then if neither one of those guys can be as effective as they have shown from time to time during the regular season, then JB has the insurance policy of Marcus Morris Sr., and he goes that direction. But it's going to be hard for any of those three guys to get consistent playing time or big minutes in a 7-game series, because I get the sense that JB is going to do it just the way that he did last year against the Knicks, and he is going to play his primary guys, his most important players, his most effective players, his most trusted players, big minutes. And that means Evan Mobley, that means Jared Allen, that means Max Strus, that means Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell, Karis LeVert. And then those other guys behind are all just kind of fighting to see who's playing better, what the situation is, what the matchup presents, game flow, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't think we can finish this topic without remembering how effective the defense was when Darius Garland and Evan Mobley were out, with lineups that included Isaac Okoro, Dean Wade, and Jared Allen mixed in with Donovan Mitchell and Karis LeVert. Like, that was a deadly lineup on the defensive end. Like, they were able to hold teams, and they were able to rise up the defensive ratings and things like that. So I think because JB Bickerstaff has seen that lineup work, I think if the Cavs need defense and their offense is sputtering, I think that there is a possibility for JB Bickerstaff to go with like Donovan Mitchell, Isaac Okoro, Max Strus, Dean Wade, and Jared Allen in a prospective lineup. And this is just a hypothetical, and we're going to get into a couple more hypothetical fun things later. But this is all getting into Donovan Mitchell's return, because Donovan Mitchell is reported to be coming back on Friday, and it's an interesting thing because even with all of that swirling, somehow reports are now coming out that Dan Gilbert is confident that Donovan Mitchell will sign an extended contract with the Cavs this summer. It's interesting, Chris, because throughout this entire season, we have talked about the importance of the first round playoff series and the Cavs showing Donovan Mitchell that they can take him to where he wants to go. Now Dan Gilbert is already kind of saying that he thinks that the Cavs have shown that and that they should be able to sign him after this season. What are you hearing, Chris? Because this is a lot going on.
Well, here's the thing. If we're just talking about the timing of this conversation that Dan Gilbert had with the Associated Press in Detroit, it ties into an event that Dan was part of where he was discussing the city of Detroit hosting the NFL draft. So it's not a situation where the clock is ticking on the regular season and Dan wanted his voice to be heard, or Dan went out looking for a reporter to talk to specifically about Donovan Mitchell, specifically about JB Bickerstaff and the Cavs situation. Dan was there, the Associated Press was there to cover the event itself, and then because of that, questions were asked to Dan pertaining to the Cavs, pertaining to Cleveland, and pertaining to Donovan Mitchell's future, because when you have an opportunity to have any kind of interview with Chairman Dan Gilbert, you're going to ask him about the Cavs. You're going to ask him about Donovan Mitchell's future and the situation in Cleveland, and what is success for this team? What's your faith level in JB Bickerstaff? And all that kind of stuff. So I don't think like the timing points to anything nefarious or anything along those lines. I just think it happened to be an event where there was an opportunity to speak to Dan, and you had to ask those kinds of questions, and that's what was asked to him. In saying that, the organization, whether it's Dan Gilbert, Kobe Altman, Mike Gansey, JB Bickerstaff, there has been a belief from the top on down that Donovan is going to stay. There has been a belief that Donovan is happy. Donovan believes in this team. He believes in the direction that this team is going in. He believes in his teammates. He believes in his chances of competing for a championship, most of the Donovan noise is coming from elsewhere in the NBA. It's not coming from Cleveland, because Cleveland has been taking a stance of, even when teams were circling Ethan around the time of the trade deadline, because Darius Garland was down and Evan Mobley was down simultaneously for 6 weeks, the Cavs got calls. Teams around the NBA were calling and saying, "Hey, you guys are going to tumble down the standings. Are you looking to trade Donovan Mitchell? Is he available? What's it going to take?" And the Cavs at that time were basically like, "Hey, lose our number. We still believe in this group that we have. We're hanging on to Donovan. He's not going anywhere." So the Cavs have been saying, for anybody that's willing to listen, they believe there's a strong chance that Donovan signs an extension this summer. And they believe that this is where Donovan wants to be. And they believe that from a basketball standpoint, this is the best place for Donovan. So most of that other stuff is coming from elsewhere. It's not coming from the Cavs. They've projected a sense of confidence about this whole situation, despite all of the speculation, despite all of the questions, despite all of the nonstop chatter about his future and his desire to go to New York or his desire to go to a bigger market. In saying that, if this is going to be the best basketball situation for Donovan, if he's going to look at it that kind of way, the way that the Cavs believe he is looking at it, they got to win in the first round of the playoffs. They can't have what happened last year against the New York Knicks happen once again. Because then how do you sell him that this is the best basketball situation for him? How do you sell him on, hey, look, we're headed in the right direction. We have the right pieces around you to continue to compete for championships and battle the Boston Celtics and the Milwaukee Bucks and the Philadelphia 76ers when they have Joel Embiid. So Dan can be confident in this situation the way that he is, and he can say, hey, we believe we have a chance to sign him to a long-term contract extension this offseason. And that's well and dandy. He probably should feel that way. He can't really project an era of concern, but him saying that in the big picture doesn't really mean all that much, because it's all about, to me, without being too over the top, it's all about what happens in the first round of these playoffs.
All right, Chris. That's some great insight, and I hope our listeners were listening, because went through a lot, but on a much less serious note, with Donovan potentially coming back, do you see him wearing a mask for his broken nose? And
Oh my.
this is my thing about it, because when I first saw Donovan come back to practice, when he wasn't actually practicing, he was just there to be in the practice facility with his guys, because that's how much Donovan likes being around his teammates, if that doesn't tell you anything. But he was wearing a little strip over his nose. It looked like a Band-Aid. It probably was something more serious after he got the surgery on his nose to put it back into place. And he didn't come to a couple games because obviously Donovan is a stylish and image-centric guy and wants to look his best, but he's been at the last couple of home games without having any coverage on his nose, so as I could see. So I don't think he will need it, but he might wear it for the bit. Okay, Chris, hear me out.
Okay.
It would be a bit to get the home crowd hyped up with a black mask like what we've seen LeBron James, Kyrie Irving, Kobe Bryant wear, and how there's this idea that it gives players superpowers or something. And now, I'm just talking hypothetically, but I think if he decides to wear the mask and he's not having his best night with it on, because we've already heard from guys like Isaac Okoro and Darius Garland who were both bothered by wearing a face covering for protection, with it blocking their peripheral vision being a key reason. But if Donovan did some theatrics, coming down on a defensive possession and tossing the mask off and then going and hitting a shot on the next possession without it on, I think it would be cool, one, and just have the same effect as to bringing belief and fun back to this team, which we've learned that they've needed to be successful. But all that to say, I don't think he'll need to wear a mask, but I wouldn't be surprised if he does. What are your thoughts, Chris?
Well, I'm not a doctor, so I don't know for sure that this particular injury requires a guy to wear a mask after it. every different facial fracture requires a different level of protection. If it was like an orbital bone around his eye or something, maybe I could see him having to wear it. In this situation, it just feels like to me, Ethan, if these guys can help it, they avoid wearing the mask. Because it's bothersome, it's a hindrance, they're not used to wearing it, they haven't been wearing it their entire basketball life. So introducing something different like that is something that could be bothersome. And it's something that could affect a person's play. And if Donovan can help it, and if it's not a requirement, I believe that he will try and go without it. In saying that, I do think it has looked cool for guys in the past. Kyrie Irving kept calling it like his Dark Knight look, which really, really cool. I can understand that. I'm a Batman fan too. So if you can go all Dark Knight, Donovan Mitchell, I'm intrigued. I think it could be fun, but for me, it's all about Donovan being comfortable and Donovan not feeling like he's limited in any kind of way. And to me, that means playing without a mask. Because it really does affect your vision, and it affects your ability to see side to side, and it can fog up, and it's just not all that comfortable because it moves around and stuff like that. So, I don't know. Every player that has been on the Cavs since I've covered the Cavs, with the exception maybe of Kyrie, just really couldn't stand wearing the mask. And basically the first quarter or the first few possessions, they yanked the thing off and they threw it off to the side and they didn't even care and they took their chances.
Yeah, so we'll see if Donovan wears it. Who knows? And maybe he'll pull out some theatrics just for the fun of it.
Can Spider-Man really go Dark Knight though? I mean, that seems like an oxymoron.
Black Spider-Man?
No.
Venom?
I mean, that's different. We're talking about Dark Knight. Dark Knight is Batman.
I know who he is. I know who he is.
The black mask that is worn by NBA players is synonymous with Batman. Nobody thinks Venom. They think Batman.
I'm saying there is a black suited Spider-Man.
I know that. I understand that. But the correlation with the black mask worn by NBA players is Batman. It's the Dark Knight. Nobody thinks Venom. They think Dark Knight. They think Batman. So for me, it's weird for a dude who goes by Spider-Man, Spider Mitchell, to be in like a Batman type motif. That's all. Getting a little bit nerdy when it comes to comics.
I mean, I didn't know you were into Batman. We'll have to talk about that more later. Anyway.
Yes, we will. Are you kidding me? The newer movies are just epic.
All right. Before we nerd out too much.
Yeah, next time we're doing a podcast, we're talking about our favorite Batman.
Marvel, DC, all of that. Great stuff.
No, I'm talking about the actor. I'm not talking about Marvel, DC. No, I'm talking about the actor. The new school actor. Who's your favorite Batman actor? We're talking about that on the podcast moving forward. Christian Bale.
All right. We're going to take a quick break. But when we come back, we're going to talk about the potential lineups and rotations that the Cavs could put together for their playoff series against their first round opponent, whoever it may be. And we're going to answer a question from a subtexter, even though it's not Hey Chris Day. So, if you want to be able to leave questions that we answer either on the podcast or directly to your phone, you can sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page to become a Cavs insider and interact with me and Chris by subscribing to Subtext. We will be right back. We're back. I want to talk about the potential lineups and rotations that the Cavs are going to use and have going into the playoffs. But I think this question from a subtexter is an interesting lead-in. I know it's not Hey Chris Day, but I still wanted to take a look at this. Chris from Olmsted Falls, not Chris Fedor, our co-host and beat reporter that you all know and love, but Chris from Olmsted Falls says, it's a question from the heat of the moment and overreaction-ish type question. But on a title contending type of team, where would Darius Garland fall? The third or fourth option or best player? Because it's tough to envision him as a number 2 guy right now. This is a two-part question, but I'm going to stop there and we're going to go through this really quickly. So, I'm going to say this. If we're thinking like title contenders, like the Boston Celtics, the Denver Nuggets, the Minnesota Timberwolves, the Oklahoma City Thunder, and the Milwaukee Bucks, just to throw out a couple examples.
Dallas Mavericks. Add them too.
To start, I want to say I think it's unfair to try and put Darius into another situation of a title contender because those teams are built around the players they have that they feel can lead them to a title. The Jason Tatums, the Anthony Edwards, the Giannis Antetokounmpos, the Shai Gilgeous-Alexanders, the Luka Doncic's of the world. And Darius doesn't fit into a lot of their systems because of how they built around the guys they had. If you say those title contenders are going to give up a player on their roster in like a trade for Darius to make it work, then I can see him fitting. But right now, it's hard to say. I couldn't see Darius's best fit in this scenario being on a rebuilding team where the team builds around him and he can still have the role players around him with the capability to score and take pressure off him. And to me, it really sounds like the best fit is for him to still be on the Cavs in that situation with everything they have right now and all the weapons they have around them, even though they aren't rebuilding in the slightest. Let me make that clear. Well, as of now. So, Chris, do you think that Darius Garland on a title contending team is a top 2 player?
Well, not the way that he's played this year. If we're having that conversation, he hasn't played like a number 2 option on a title contending team. The second best player for the Cavs this year has been Jarrett Allen. And that is somewhat problematic because he's got some limitations on the offensive end of the floor. He's got some weaknesses that can be exposed by teams in a 7-game series as well. I think the Cavs were very, very hopeful, Ethan. Either Darius or Evan was going to take a big step forward, a significant step forward, and displace Jarrett as the second most important player, or the number 2 option, if you want to consider him that. It hasn't happened. Obviously, Darius and Evan have both dealt with injuries. It's been a wonky season from that standpoint. It's played part in their uneven production at both ends of the floor. More so Darius at both ends of the floor, because Evan on defense is still just a menace. It's just, he hasn't been available as much as past years to make opponents and make it feel like he's making such a significant impact for this team. But I think if we're being honest about the way that both of those guys have played throughout the course of the season and the inconsistencies that have followed them throughout the year, it's hard for me to say that Darius is a number 2 on a championship team. The other thing is this, Ethan. Very few title teams in the course of NBA history have been built around guards, right? The last team that was built around a guard that won a championship was Steph Curry. And Steph is a transcendent talent who has revolutionized the game of basketball. So that's not the rule, that's more the exception. And you make the exception because of the sheer greatness of Steph. He is going to go down as the best shooter in NBA history. He's going to go down as one of the best point guards in NBA history. So it's a little bit different when you're talking about him and building around him versus the Cavs trying to build around Donovan Darius, or the Cavs before LeBron James came back trying to build around Kyrie Irving. So that in itself can be problematic when it comes to team building. But again, if we're being honest, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, would Darius be the number 2 option there? No. He wouldn't be the number 2 option in Milwaukee. He wouldn't be the number 2 option in New York when fully healthy at full strength. Maybe he would be the number 2 option in Orlando behind Paolo in front of Franz. He would probably be the number 2 option in Indiana, if we're just talking about it that way. No to Miami. No to Philly. Maxi's been better than him throughout the course of this year. No in Denver. No in Minnesota. Maybe in Oklahoma City, depending on how you feel about Darius versus Jalen Williams. Certainly not with the Clippers. Probably with the Pelicans.
Can I pause you there? No, whoa, okay. First of all, I disagree on 2 points there. You said Oklahoma. So Shai and Chet.
No, Chet's not a number 2 option. Stop it.
Okay.
He had 6 turnovers and 2 points the other night before fouling out. No, he's not a number 2 option in a 7-game series at this stage of his career.
We're talking
He's
playoffs. We're talking
rookie.
playoffs. I thought we were just talking about in general.
Course.
Okay. But that takes me to the Pelicans.
He's a
Yeah,
rookie.
yeah, no, I hear you. I hear you. I agree with you now. I thought we were just talking about in general being a number 2 option. Anyway, but the Pelicans, Zion, CJ, Brandon. There's no way Darius Garland is taking a spot from CJ or Brandon in my eyes.
Brandon Ingram's not healthy right now, so
Okay, I'm talking about everybody healthy. I'm talking about going into a playoff series.
okay, so everybody healthy. No, he would be the number 3 option in New Orleans. He would be in front of
I'll
CJ.
give you that. I'll give you that.
Yeah, I think he would be in front of CJ. I think a majority of teams around the NBA would put him in front of CJ in a hierarchy.
Yeah, I get that. I feel you. But I think we've come to the consensus that the answer is in a majority of the contending teams' cases, the answer is no. And
Yeah, I think he's more of a 2.5,
to be,
especially based on the way that he's played this year.
yeah, I agree. So the last part of the question from Chris in Olmsted Falls, it goes back to the Cavs game against the Hornets, asking what level of responsibility do you put on JB for the losses like this? And I think we have to circle back to this conversation because this has been a recurring theme. Like they lost to the Blazers earlier in the season when we thought that was one of the worst losses. Now they lost to the Hornets, a team that was simply awful and allowed them to score like they were one of the better teams in the NBA. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on it, but I wanted to say this first. I think we've said it multiple times this year, Chris. If the Cavs can't get over the first round hump, I think this organization is going to lean to go in a different direction coaching wise, especially with the notion that Donovan Mitchell is going to commit to being in Cleveland longer. It would mean that they need someone else to lead them to where they want to go. Plus, we'd have to look at what the Cavs would do with Okoro and LeVert and who they prioritize more based on their performances in the playoffs this year. But I just want to get your thoughts about the coaching situation and how much responsibility you give to JB because even he said he needs to be better.
Yes, certainly there are things that JB can do better. Certainly there are things that he has done wrong throughout the course of this season. And we can criticize his in-game substitution patterns. We can criticize his rotations. We can criticize the fact that they struggle maybe more than any team in the NBA getting the ball inbounds in critical situations. We can criticize the fact that down the stretch of games, in clutch moments, the Cavs certainly have not been at their best. But the thing that I don't think we should do is take these one-game situations or these bad stretches throughout the course of the season and start talking about them as if it's Cleveland's defining moment, or start talking about them as if it's some precursor to failure of things to come. NBA teams, great coaches, have bad stretches. NBA teams, great coaches, make mistakes. The Miami Heat have dealt with a bunch of injuries, the same as the Cavs. And despite the fact that Eric Spoelstra is the best coach in the entire NBA, the Cavs have a better record than the Heat. The Heat have been just as inconsistent as the Cavs. But nobody's talking about Eric Spoelstra and the mistakes that he makes as a coach. Nobody's talking about the inconsistency of Miami. Nobody's writing off Miami because they're 4-6 in their last 10 and they've got some baffling losses. So all I'm saying is there's no reason to judge a team at its worst or at its lowest point or start making it seem like that's the norm for the team. Right? The loss against Charlotte, the terrible defense that the Cavs showed against Charlotte, that's not the norm. That's not who they've been throughout the course of this season. They have beat up on the lesser opponents. They have been one of the best defenses in the league. I think it's fair to criticize any coach, JB included. And he is not going to do everything right, and he hasn't done everything right. But this team is 44-29. They're fourth in the Eastern Conference, despite the fact that Donovan Mitchell has played 172 total minutes since the All-Star break, despite the fact that their expected starting five has penned together maybe 22 total games this year, despite the fact that some of their most important players have missed lengthy stretches throughout the course of this season. And I think as much as it's fair to criticize JB for his shortcomings and some of the flaws that he has shown as a coach, I think on the other side, it's also right to point out the fact that despite everything this team has been through, they're still considered a contending team in the Eastern Conference. They're still 44-29. They're still in the top 4 in the East currently.
Yeah, Chris, and I mean, I think if the Cavs are able to go on a deep run this postseason, I think the credibility and the respect that JB Bickerstaff deserves needs to be as loud as the disrespect has been all season.
Yeah, it won't be.
Obviously,
You know that.
because we understand the fan bases that we are working with and how crazy they can get.
And because they've dug their heels in, and they've already determined that JB stinks as a coach.
But if he is able to pull this Cavs team past the first round, especially if they play against a team that we don't see as favorable for them, then I think that he deserves the credit for what he's been able to accomplish this season. And I think even before then, being able to take this team that was without 2 of their highest scorers and then without their star player for multiple games throughout the entire season, he deserves a lot of credit for just the Cavs being in the 4th seed and not falling down all the way down the standings.
Actually, one more thing. For people that are talking about the shortcomings of JB and the shortcomings of the Cavs since the calendar flipped to March, ask yourself what you think the primary reason for that is. Because to me, the answer is simple. People don't want to hear it because they think of it as an excuse. But the primary reason that the Cavs are 3-7 in their last 10, the primary reason that the Cavs are 6-9 in the month of March, and this doesn't excuse the bad losses. There have been some terrible losses and some terrible performances. But if we're trying to figure out the how and the why of everything that's going on around this team, like, the answer's right in front of you. The primary reason that they have fallen down the standings and they've played this level of inconsistent basketball in this month is because their most important player has been sidelined for the duration of it, basically. And even when he has been on the floor, he admittedly hasn't been himself. He hasn't been as effective. This sounds simplistic, and I totally understand that. It's basketball. It's a team sport. But the Cavs are night and day different when Donovan Mitchell's on the court versus when he's off. They have a net rating over 8 when he's on the floor, which extrapolated over the season is the 3rd best team in the NBA. It is a minus when he is off the floor. In terms of overall point tally, he is the only one who's been missing for such an extended stretch that makes that kind of difference. For his team, anyway. Look at the 76ers without Embiid. Nick Nurse is a great coach. Nick Nurse has a championship. He is a great tactician that will probably, in a 7-game series, give Philadelphia a coaching edge in a lot of those matchups. They suck right now. They have fallen all the way to 8th. Does that mean he's a bad coach? Does that mean that that championship that he won was a fluke? Does that mean that going into a playoff series against whoever it is, Philadelphia is going to be at a disadvantage? No. It means he has been without one of the most important players in the entire NBA, one of the most impactful players in the entire NBA for such a long stretch of time, and no team is capable of overcoming that significant of a loss. Not consistently. You're not going to play to the same consistent level. And you can have the same conversation about other teams. When you take Donovan Mitchell off the Cleveland Cavaliers, they're going to be different. They're not going to win as many games. They're not going to play as well. They're going to be lapses of inconsistency. So we can sit here and we can have these conversations about lineups, and we can talk about splitting up Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen, and we can talk about JB and his tactics and his schemes and motivating these guys and playing with more of a sense of urgency. And we can talk about Darius Garland. And we can talk about the evolution of Evan Mobley and stuff like that. The primary reason that the Cavs have fallen in March is because Donovan Mitchell has not been there for them.
All right, Chris. With all that being said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs insider and interact with Chris and me by subscribing to Subtext. Sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me and Chris. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.